Phil Prokofiev and you are watching Digital Living. Today we'll be talking about the hashtag ProAnna, an online community encouraging anorexia. Also on the programme, when do music fans take it too far with hashtags like Bold for Bieber? But first, was the Arab Spring truly a social media revolution?
Tonight at 10, more unrest in Egypt as pressure grows on the president to step down.
The hunt is on for Colonel Gaddafi. Libyan rebels fight street to street with the regime's die-hard supporters in Tripoli. A victory for Egypt's popular uprising. Hosni Mubarak is no longer the president.
The idea of the Arab Spring being a social media revolution is one first fed to the public through the media. Told stories of its unprecedented use, it had the ability to inform and coordinate the masses in ways never seen before. Tweets were sent with updates of goings-on and calls to arms, all said to be organised through a collection of location-specific hashtags used to help spread the word of their story. But was it all as simple as this? There is no doubt social media was involved and played an important role. But for this to have been a social media revolution, it has to have been, if not the only, then certainly the most widely accessed source of information across the region. Other non-state forms of media were available, however, such as satellite TV channel Al Jazeera. So did these forms have little impact, or was the idea of a social media revolution one blown out of proportion by the media?
Joining us today via Skype is Samuel Nzioki, Head of Journalism, Media and Philosophy at the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University in South Africa. Samuel, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks.
So, what was the significance of social media to the Arab Spring?
Of course it was significant. I know the debate still rages as to whether social media created anything or not, or whether the conditions, the political situation was already ripe for such events. That being said, there is no way that kind of mass mobilization to make the kind of statement that was made would have been possible if it wasn't for social media. So it was a very big role because there was frustration that had lasted for a long time and people didn't know how to go around the political mechanisms and state apparatus to mobilize significantly to push for change. So social media did aid in jumping through the hoops, security, state apparatus to eventually get people on the streets. So it was a big role.
So, do you believe social media was the most democratic line of communication available to the Arab people?
In that instance, yes. That's what it was used for. If you speak about democracy and we're talking in a state where there's very strict control with regard to expression and censorship, then in a state where control for social media space could materialize.
Would this have been possible without social media?
I don't think so. I don't think they had tried. I mean, there's historical evidence that they had tried for so many years. And of course, in previous generations with a different kind of citizen or audience or political player that relied on particular protocols like meeting in small groups, either at homes or in villages. That was not possible because it's easy to disrupt that. But with this generation, different way of thinking outside normal constraints, where a meeting doesn't have to happen in one physical location. Yes, then social media did become that one big tool that assisted with the kind of mobilization they needed.
Okay, so do you agree that perhaps the focus on social media's role in the revolution trivializes it?
Yes, I do. Actually, it's a serious oversimplification of a very bigger issue. Social media in this instance was just a tool, and that needs to be made very clear. It was just a tool. And if you want to know that's true, after the excitement of the Arab Spring, they're sort of back where they were before, aren't they? So yeah, in that case, yeah, it's really an oversimplification of very, very serious issues because, I mean, for instance, the military stayed out in the first place. In the first run of the revolution, the military stayed out so that someone can do what we are thinking is someone do their job. And then after they got out the person they wanted, they came in and they're back, and you can't use social media, you can't do anything. They just ran roughshod over you. So it wasn't really a social media revolution. It would be a trivialization of a serious issue.
Okay, but would all of this have been possible before the rise of the internet and social media?
Possibly, but not the same magnitude. Don't forget that governments are becoming much tighter with the security apparatus. For example, there's much more ease of control on the internet, and there's more agitation that internet surveillance be localized in countries. If you are going to run any internet protocol, you have to have your servers in particular countries. So it's going to be much more difficult than it was during the Arab Spring.
So it wouldn't have been as potent?
Nothing much would have changed. The protests would have been snuffed out very fast. That had happened before. So social media did help in create much more noise than was before.
So would you call the Arab Spring a true social media revolution?
No, I wouldn't. And in fact, the term itself is problematic. What is a social media revolution? When I think about it, it doesn't tell me anything. The phrase itself does not communicate anything.
Samuel Nzioki of the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University, thank you for joining us. The uprisings in the Arab world were made by the people, but many academics certainly believe that social media was an accelerant. For many, the internet provides a safe community of support, even if it's for something like anorexia.
I came home and I started coughing up blood, and I just lay on the bed in my mum's room, and I was like, this is the end of my life. This is me gone.
With over 180 million Tumblr blogs, 240 million Twitter accounts, and 3 million new blogs every month, it's no wonder so much of our lives are online. In the UK, around 5% of young girls are diagnosed with anorexia. It's estimated that around 165,000 of us have an eating disorder, of which 10% of those will die. There are also 1 in 6 women and 1 in 10 men who regularly skip meals to attempt to control their weight, despite being healthy.
I would just type in the hashtag for anorexia and pro-ana and all of that, and I just looked at thin people, and for me, the biggest thing was my legs. I was mad about the thigh gap, and that was what I wanted. Until I had one, I wasn't going to stop. But then when I had one, it wasn't big enough, and I had to make it bigger. I had to have a bigger thigh gap. So I just, there was no particular blog on Tumblr that I'd look at and say, okay, well, this is my favourite blog, but I'd always just type in the hashtags for anorexia and pro-ana, and then I was kind of am I anorexic?
We use hashtags to interact with others who have similar interests. However, those with mental conditions can easily be influenced by others online, which increase their chances of relapsing.
Thinness is really valued, and the problem seems to be becoming more and more acute because models, celebrities and so forth, they seem to be getting thinner and thinner.
As most of the inspiration to get thin is triggered by images, Tumblr has become one of the biggest social media sites to host glorification accounts linked to many mental illnesses. To help prevent users being triggered, a new warning message has been put in place. But is this just too easy to dismiss and continue browsing?
With us here is Dr. Adrienne Evans, a senior media and communications lecturer here at Coventry University. Dr. Evans, thanks for being with us.
Not a problem.
So, pro-ana or pro-anorexia. For those of us that don't know, what is pro-ana?
Pro-ana is an online community that developed in the early part of the 21st century. It's a support community. It's also a place where people suffering with anorexia talk to each other, engage with each other. They create networks of support. They also encourage some of the eating patterns associated with anorexia. There's also pro-mia, which is pro-bulimia. They kind of fit into a range of other online communities that are around kind of what are often understood as the darker side of the internet, I suppose, or the darker side of health issues.
We saw a VT, and the girl in it, Grania, she felt supported by the online groups. Would you say that it's a promotion of anorexia?
No, absolutely not. There is nothing promotional about it. These communities are very interested in keeping themselves to themselves. They do not want the media, they do not want what are often referred to as one-orexics joining the community. It is not about encouraging dieting. It is not about encouraging young girls to be thin. It is people who are suffering with what we understand as a disorder, and using the internet as a space to communicate with each other, to talk about their disorder. It's a support community, it's a network.
So do they discourage anorexia?
They don't discourage it either, but they are part of a network in a community. So it's not about encouraging or discouraging, it's about supporting each other within that community as long as they are genuinely anorexic.
Right, well I've got some rules here from a pro-anorexia site. Mm-hmm. Here it says some rules to live by. Don't eat anything white. Do not, under any circumstances, eat after 6 p.m. Anna must be the centre of your life. Mm-hmm. Eat in front of a mirror, naked or in underwear if possible. If you can't, carry a picture of yourself in a revealing outfit and look at it when you want to eat. Wear a rubber band around your wrist and snap it when you want to eat. Food equals pain. Mm-hmm. What do you have to say about stuff like that?
Those 10 commandments are usually what happened in the early part of the 2000s. These communities kind of exploded. There was an awful lot of media coverage. There was an awful lot of journalists looking into these communities, engaging in these communities and opening them up to public scrutiny. What then happened is that it produced a kind of splintering off. There were the genuine pro-ana sites that tended to go much more underground. There were also those that sort of bought into the publicity around pro-ana and encouraged fairly dangerous sets of ideas around how people should eat, how people should engage with food. There's many kinds of pro-ana websites. There's not just these ones that are about the kind of 10 commandments or the extreme forms of encouragement. There's an awful lot of media fuss around the idea of pro-ana buddies as well. This idea that anorexics can pair up and encourage each other to starve themselves to death. They exist, they absolutely exist, but those are usually what they call copycat sites of the traditional pro-ana sites that start a little bit earlier.
So do the core pro-ana sites at their heart have an element of recovery to them?
Some of them do, yes. There's particular websites that are about recovery. There's particular websites that are about anorexic human rights. There's also an emerging community of post-pro-ana. So once you've stepped out of that community, you still need that support, you still need that level of communication with people who are suffering with the same kinds of disorders as you. And the important thing is to be aware that anorexia kills regardless of pro-ana communities or not. The medical model does not have the solution to this.
So why do things like pro-ana find life online? Why do they gain such a mass following?
Because people do find support online, people do find a community online, people do find other individuals who share similar lifestyles, regardless of whether that happens to be anorexia or any other kind of activity. People find support and they find a voice online. And again, it's not necessarily about this being a positive thing or a negative thing. It's a case of recognising that this isn't a problem that's going to go away, and it isn't a problem that's going to go away with a medical model. It isn't a problem that's going to go away by pathologising people or criminalising people for activities that they're engaging in.
So you don't think there's an element of influence to it?
No. No, absolutely not. And to suggest that there is an element of influence to it kind of treats, because we also have to be aware of the gender that we're dealing with here, and we're dealing largely with groups of younger women.
What's the split between men and women here?
There aren't many men in pro-ana communities online.
At all?
No. not that I'm aware of. There was one, but there isn't any more.
Why do you think that is?
Why are women
Yeah.
affected by this?
Yeah.
It's tied into the history of femininity. It's tied into the way that femininity has been historically pathologized. It's tied into the way that women of food have been pathologized. If you look at accounts by people like Susie Orbach is a very famous feminist who's written an awful lot on anorexia. She's argued that it's to do with the way that women are treated around food. So women and food has become culturally something that we understand as weird. During meal times, mothers are meant to give up their food to their children or to their husbands. So we end up with this kind of history where women and food become a problematic relationship. Equally, we get this pathologization of women. So we get this slow, steady development of these eating disorders in this case, equally around things like...
Has that been blown up online? Does online perpetuate that?
No.
You don't believe so?
No, not necessarily. These things are happening anyway.
Yeah.
It's the same case with something like cyberbullying. Bullying is happening anyway. People are getting bullied and people are being harmed by bullying.
How accessible it all is, all the material, how accessible all the material is, does that not make it more immediate, more, more there for young people?
Yes, but that depends on a very simplistic understanding of the way the media influences us. We don't see something on TV and then run out and do it. If that was the case, we'd have an awful lot of people shooting each other outside this building right now, and we don't. Because we don't just watch something violent on television and then go and repeat it outside. That is not how the media works. That's not how influence works. Of course, there is influence there. We take up discourses that we have available to us, but it's not necessarily that we see something on TV and we reproduce that instantly. Equally, the same goes for the internet.
Do you see the amount of sites and their membership growing as time goes on?
No, not necessarily. I think there's going to remain a need for those websites because people need support. But I don't think there's going to necessarily be any kind of growth or dying down of them either.
Dr. Evans, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. And now, fandom can be a joining force online. It can be a place for dedicated music fans to have direct access to artists via Twitter. But what effect do these communities have on the world of fandom?
Fandom drives culture. It started with Elvis and Beatlemania in the early 60s and it still carries on in 2014 with artists like One Direction and Justin Bieber. With social media, fandom has become a second identity for many. It gives them a place to hide and become a new person amongst others with similar taste. Online fandom could be a second identity for many people. It's a place to hide, a place to share interests, and a place to feel socially included. Fans have direct access to their favourite artists using Twitter. This can often bring out malicious hashtags such as Cut for Bieber and can also cause fans to rival against each other.
Dr. Bianca Wright, Senior Lecturer in Digital Journalism here in the Media Department. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So, how do you think that the online space has intensified fandom?
I think that in the past fans were quite niche in the terms of the size of the communities. So you found little pockets of people that would get together to talk about issues, to trade things, so fan fiction for example. You would create a little zine and you'd photocopy it somewhere and hand it out to a few people, or maybe try to sell it somehow using postal systems. Online has of course made that a lot easier. So what it means is you can connect a greater number of people who are interested in the same thing, and they can share that love in different ways. You can tweet about it, you can go onto Facebook, you can have your own YouTube channel, you can create a blog. It becomes part of that online experience, and in so doing it becomes part of your identity.
Do you think that the online space has given fandom more of an obsessive edge?
In a way, but I think the nature of social media and the nature of online environments is that you're going to see that kind of connection because we're carrying those devices around with us. So if you're using those devices as a means to express that part of your identity, you are going to be doing it more and more because you have access to these things more and more. You couldn't meet with people face to face in a group, in a fan club, every minute of every day, but you can tweet about it whenever you're free. And I think that's the difference. It's about access and it's about reach.
So how has that changed how people react to fandom, how people use fandom, how fandom is a part of their life?
I think it's created a much closer link between the object of the fandom and the fans. What that means is, let's say it's a film franchise or a band, you suddenly have the opportunity to speak back to that object of your passion, your obsession. So you can actually contact Nathan Fillion if you're a Firefly fan.
Yeah.
You can contact your favorite band, lead singer, and so on. In many instances, it's the PR person that's running those accounts. But there's much more of a sense of intimacy as a result of that. It's different to writing a physical letter, putting it in the mail and sending it off. You don't get that immediate sense of reaction, interaction, support, etc. that you do from social media. If I post something on Twitter, I can get an immediate response from the person I'm posting it to. And that creates something different in the dynamic of fandom. What it means is suddenly the fans are not just something separate from the actual object of their desire. They've become part of it, and they add to it every time they comment, critique, etc.
Can there be a certain danger to that?
I think if it becomes the whole focus of your life and the whole focus of your online identity, I think fandom is one part of who you are. So if I think about my life, I'm a fan, but I'm also a mother, I'm a lecturer, I'm a journalist, I'm many other things. I think when you become a fan that excludes every other part of your identity and you begin to dissociate from the real world, that is when it becomes dangerous. But I don't think extreme fandom, although it's quite often judged, is necessarily dangerous. It's one way of expressing identity, as somebody who identifies with goth or punk or emo or anything else would.
Well, speaking about online identities, how do you think people form these identities? What are the most significant ways that people create their online space, their own personal pocket of online space?
Well, I suppose the most obvious way is through the avatar or the handle that you create online. So you might have Belieber fan or something like that as your Twitter handle, or you might have Metalhead, or you might decide to have a profile picture that expresses some aspect of that fandom, has you in a particular pose or with a particular person. So that's one part. The other part is, of course, the things that you are following. So the things that you are tweeting about, the things that you are liking on Facebook, the things that you are sharing, that is one way in which you express that. And what happens is people then see you through that lens because of what you've put out there.
Right.
So it's partly what you do, and then it's partly how other people see you.
And what does that do to people's identity, to the way people relate to other people and how they relate to themselves?
Well, I think one of the big things about fandom in general is that it's about belonging. You're finding a community of like-minded people who share a desire, a passion, an obsession, and who are able to express that in some way. The negative side of that is, of course, you're judged for that. In the online environment, whatever you do is seen, and it's not always seen by the people that you want to see it. So if you think about Twitter, if you're tweeting things, oh, you're a big geek, because you like Star Wars or you like Star Trek or you like whatever it is, or you're a teeny bopper because you like Justin Bieber. It's judgments that people make about who you are as a result of your fandom, which may or may not coincide with your own sense of identity. So you might not see yourself as a geek or a teeny bopper or whatever,
Right.
but others may see you as that because of what you're putting out there.
People say there's an element of narcissism in online identities and at their core. Do you believe that?
I do believe that. I think it's becoming more about the me. How do I present myself? There's an anxiety attached to that. So it's not just self-love, but it's also a fear. I need to present myself in the best possible way, and I create a version of myself. That version may not have anything to do with who I am in real life, but it's something that I put out there to manage and to be managed by other people and by myself. And I think that interaction is very interesting. It's not just about what you put online, but how people respond to that and how you adjust your own responses as a result.
So do you believe that fractures identity in a way?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Splits it up into different parts?
Well, you know, I think people want to share the parts of themselves that are socially acceptable.
Right.
So if you have something that you fear is not acceptable to broader society, you're going to try to cover it up. At the same time, you may decide to hook your identity onto something that is socially acceptable, ride that bandwagon, even if you're not necessarily a real fan of that particular phenomenon.
So what forms do you think identity will take as time goes on?
I think that there will continue to be an interest in how online shapes your identity, and I think that people are attracted to that because there's both an intimacy and a distance in that. And so what happens is you are creating an identity for yourself and you're allowing others to manage that identity for you. Sherry Turkle has a wonderful book called Alone Together, and she speaks about how social media and the online environment has actually resulted in people feeling more lonely because they're unable to connect in real life.
Right.
And I think that has a huge impact on identity. People sometimes feel, oh, I can be myself online, but at the same time, there's that sense that you can't be because others are judging you. So I do think that there's going to be a change in the way that we interact online as people start to realize that social isn't maybe as social as they think it is.
Dr. Bianca Wright, thank you for joining us. And thank you for watching Digital Living. I'm Phil Prokofiev.